Let's go back to the start. Monday, January the 12th, 1987. If you look at the meteorological history books, they will coldly inform you that this was the coldest day of the 20th century in southern England. In Warlingham, Surrey, the daytime temperature struggled to reach -9 degrees Celsius. By nightfall, parts of the Scottish Highlands would plummet to a bone-shattering -26 degrees Celsius. But numbers on a page are sterile. They don't tell you how it felt. They don't tell you about the silence. Tick-tock, tick-tock. To understand why this specific Monday broke the backbone of the country, we have to look up, way up. Usually, Britain is geographically lucky. We are wrapped in a warm blanket provided by the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf Stream. Warm, wet westerlies keep us mild, damp and safe. But in the first week of January 1987, the shield broke. A weather system known as a blocking high formed over Scandinavia. Imagine a giant invisible wall of high pressure anchoring itself in place. Thud. It refused to move. This wall blocked our warm Atlantic air completely, and then the engine reversed. Instead of warm air from the west, the wind direction flipped. It opened a corridor straight from the freezing plains of Siberia, dragging continental polar air across the North Sea and slamming it directly into the soft underbelly of Great Britain. This air carried a weapon we rarely see in the UK, the wind chill. It didn't just feel cold, it felt like the air was trying to bite you. And here is the meteorological detail that most people miss, the specific physics of the disaster. It started with rain. On Saturday, the ground was wet, but as that Siberian air hit, the thermodynamics changed instantly. Snap. The roads didn't evaporate, they flash froze. The roads became sheets of black ice. And then came the snow. Not the wet, slushy, friendly snow used for snowmen. This was powder snow, fine, dry, dust-like. Because it lacked moisture, it didn't stick together. The wind picked it up like sand in a desert storm and built drifts 6 feet high against doors and windows. By the time the sun rose on Monday morning, the trap was shut. Britain wasn't just cold, it was locked in a cage of ice. So the trap was set. Monday morning arrived, millions of people woke up, put on their heavy coats and headed for the station. They expected delays, they expected the usual British grumbling, but they didn't expect total paralysis. To understand why the country stopped, we need to look at the specific vulnerabilities of our machines. In the southeast of England, the railway network is unique. It relies on the third rail, a live steel rail running along the ground to power the trains. On that morning, the third rail had a fundamental problem: ice, crackle, spark. Ice is a surprisingly perfect electrical insulator. A hard, ceramic-like layer of ice had coated the rail. The trains were sitting right on top of their power source, but they couldn't drink it. Commuters stood shivering on platforms, watching as blue sparks exploded violently from the wheels, trying to find a connection and failing. But for the rest of the country, using diesel trains and lorries, the enemy was even smaller. It was molecular. This is where the science gets fascinating. Diesel fuel contains paraffin wax. At normal temperatures, it is a liquid. You don't even know it's there. But at -9 degrees, a threshold known as the cloud point, that wax begins to change state. It solidifies, it forms millions of tiny crystals, sludge. These crystals were sucked into the fuel filters of locomotives and trucks, clogging the engines instantly. It is a phenomenon called diesel waxing. British Rail had tried to run ghost trains, empty trains running all night just to keep the tracks clear, but even the ghost trains died on the tracks. Their fuel had simply turned into white jelly.
And on the roads, the M25 motorway, the pride of Britain, the orbital artery around London, became a 117-mile-long car park. Why? The gritters were out, they were spreading salt. But here is a fact many people don't know. Road salt isn't magic. It relies on a chemical reaction to melt ice, lowering the freezing point of water. But below -7, that reaction slows down. Below -10, it stops working entirely. Grind.
The salt just sat there on top of the ice, useless as sand. Physics had defeated engineering. Drivers were trapped in their cars for 12 hours. There were reports of people burning their road maps inside their vehicles just to generate a tiny bit of heat. The infrastructure hadn't just failed, it had been outsmarted by nature. If the streets were a frozen wasteland, the home was supposed to be a sanctuary. But in 1987, the cold didn't stop at the front door, it came inside. We need to talk about the physics of water. It is one of the few substances in the universe that expands when it freezes. Inside the copper pipes hidden deep within the walls of British homes, the water began to turn to ice. As it froze, it expanded by exactly 9%. Creak, groan. The pressure built up inside the metal. We are talking about thousands of pounds per square inch of pressure until, snap. Across the country, copper split open. But here was the cruel twist. Because the water was frozen solid, nothing leaked yet. It was a ticking bomb, silently waiting for the thaw to detonate. The worst hit were the tower blocks, the concrete giants of London. These buildings relied on massive vertical pipes called risers to pump water to the top floors. These risers froze solid from the ground up. Suddenly, tens of thousands of people in high-rise flats had no running water, no flushing toilets, and this led to a sight that hadn't been seen since the Blitz of World War II. Clang, clatter, standpipes. Emergency taps were set up on street corners. People stood in the snow, clutching plastic buckets, kettles, and saucepans. They queued for hours just to get enough water to make a cup of tea or wash their faces. In a modern G7 nation, civilization had been stripped back to the absolute basics. And then the ultimate symbol of British stability surrendered, Big Ben. The great clock of Westminster had ticked through the bombs of the Luftwaffe. It had ticked through the storms of decades, but on that Monday, clunk. The mechanism failed. The issue wasn't the gears, but the lubricating oil. The extreme cold increased the viscosity of the oil until it turned into a sticky syrup. The heavy, chiming hammers couldn't lift against the resistance. At 12 noon, when the bongs should have echoed across London, there was only silence.
If you were there, you remember that feeling. If Big Ben couldn't cope, what chance did the rest of us have? While London was fighting for water, the coast was fighting for survival. Spare a thought for the Isle of Sheppey in Kent. Geographically, it is only separated from the mainland by a small channel, but on January 14th, that channel became a prison moat. The snowdrifts on the Kingsferry Bridge, the island's only road link, were so deep that no vehicle could pass. For 30,000 people, the 20th century just disappeared. Supermarket shelves went empty, no bread, no milk, no medicine. The silence was terrifying. Until a new sound broke the air. Thud, 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 thud. The heavy beat of rotors. RAF Chinook helicopters appeared on the horizon. It looked like a scene from a disaster movie or a war zone. But the military had been deployed not to fight an enemy, but to deliver yeast to the local bakeries so they could bake bread for the starving islanders. It was the Berlin airlift in miniature, right here in Kent. But the most shocking sight was at the beach. We all know water freezes at 0 degrees Celsius, but seawater is different. It is salty. Salt lowers the freezing point. It fights the ice. For the sea to freeze in England, you need extreme, prolonged and biting cold, and in 1987 we had it. At Southend-on-Sea, the unthinkable happened. Crunch. The waves stopped moving. The water turned into a slushy grey soup, and then it hardened. For the first time since the big freeze of 1963, the sea froze. Photographs from that day show an alien landscape. People were walking out onto the ocean. Seagulls sat confused on frozen waves, unsure where the water had gone. Fishing boats were locked in the ice, tilting at crazy angles, trapped in a white grip. It was a geological rarity, a moment where the geography of Britain was temporarily rewritten by the temperature. And then, as quickly as the Siberian door had opened, it slammed shut. Around January 20th, the wind shifted back to the west, the familiar Atlantic air returned, and the silence of the last 2 weeks was broken by a new sound. Drip, drip, splash.
The thaw had begun. But if you think the snow was bad, the thaw was almost worse. In Britain, snow does not leave with dignity. It turns into slush. Grey, brown, freezing cold soup that covered every pavement. Squelch. For days, the country was knee-deep in dirty water. And remember those frozen pipes we talked about, the ones hiding inside the walls, expanded by the ice? This was the moment of truth. As the ice turned back to water, it poured out through the cracks in the split copper. Whoosh! Ceilings collapsed, living rooms were flooded. Plumbers became the most wanted people in the country. You couldn't hire one for love nor money. The Great Freeze had one final sting in its tail before it left. But slowly, normality returned, and the sound that signaled the end of the crisis wasn't a politician speaking or a train moving. It was a much smaller, gentler sound. Clink, clink. The electric milk float rattling down the street at 5 a.m, delivering glass bottles to doorsteps. When the milk arrived, liquid, not frozen, we knew the siege was over. Looking back from today, the winter of 1987 feels like a different world. Today we have 24-hour news, thermal fabrics, and internet forecasts on our phones. We cancel trains when there are leaves on the line. We close schools at the first sight of a single snowflake. We have become safer, but perhaps we have also become softer. 1987 was the last great winter. It was the last time nature truly humbled us. It was a sharp slap to the face of our modern arrogance. It reminded us that no matter how much concrete we pour or how much technology we invent, we are still small. It was the year the diesel turned to wax, the year the sea turned to stone, and the year we learned that sometimes the only way to survive is to put the kettle on and wait for the thaw. Were you there in 87? Did you walk on the frozen sea, or did you have to melt snow just to flush the toilet? Or maybe your parents have a story about the whiteout. Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more dives into British history. Stay warm, everyone.